definitely the paper's responsibility to like keep you informed. That's what you're paying for, is to keep you informed of what's happening in your backyard, and what your money is being spent on, and what the policies that your policymakers are up to. But you got to pay for it. You know what I mean? Like, it's all there is to it. Like, if you want that kind of coverage, you're gonna have have to invest in it. And I think people think that that they don't have to. They just took it for granted. They still take it for granted that they'll get the information one way or the other. But the information that they're getting is, again, coming from very biased sources. If it's not coming from an actual news outlet.
Welcome to the News Nirvana podcast. I'm your host, Nick Parker. The News Nirvana podcast features conversations with media professionals from across the country, highlighting our ever-evolving business models and showcasing the strong and effective journalism produced each and every day. This podcast is made possible to you by the generosity of Town News. Town News delivers solutions, services, and guidance empowering local media organizations to thrive in an ever-changing digital world. Contact Town News today to learn more how they can help you thrive. Connect with them at townnews.com. Hello and welcome back to the News Nirvana podcast. I am Nick Parker. Joining me today is the Daily Herald's Jake Griffin, the assistant managing editor for Watchdog Reporting. Welcome, Jake.
Hello, Nick.
Okay, I messed up. We're starting over. This is our take two for this episode. Jake, you're Watchdog Reporting. I think that's something that has, a lot of people, I think if you hear narratives around the country about media, and this is what we try to push back a little bit on the show, is that doesn't happen as often as maybe it should, or as old people like to say, as it used to. So let's kind of just start a little bit with what it is that you're doing in suburban Chicago as a Watchdog reporter.
Well, suburban Chicago is kind of a weird animal. Illinois is a weird animal. For those that are unknowledgeable about Illinois, the first thing you need to know about us is that we have more units of government than any state in the union, somewhere in the ballpark of 8,000, depending on
good Lord
how you count them. So we have towns and municipalities, we have counties, we have townships, and within those townships, you not only have the government that is taking care of the day-to-day business, but you have its own road district. So that's another layer of government, that its own taxing powers. School districts, park districts, library districts, fire protection districts, mosquito abatement districts, sanitary and sewer districts. The whole, like, if you can think of it as a taxing body, Illinois has dubbed it so. So there's a lot to keep your eye on.
These are all independent,
all independent
entities.
Yep. These are all their own elected officials and own taxing powers.
So how are you, I guess it sounds like a lot of what you do is going to be data reporting, that you are just going to sift through a lot of data to see what these districts are spending on, how they're spending it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I rely heavily on tips from residents that want to know what's going on in their town or in their community. And because their community has, when you get a property tax bill in Illinois, it's, going to be 10 or 12 different people that are taxing you, or, agencies that are taxing you. And so what I do is, if I can expand upon the idea of the premise of that tip, for instance, like my school district has too much money in reserves, and I'll take a look at that school district, and they could have somewhere in the ballpark of 2 months of operational expenses and reserves, and some places have 2 years worth of operational expenses. We cover 100 school districts, and within those school districts, they're weird too, because some school districts are unit school districts, which is K through 12. Then we have elementary school districts, which are K through 8, and then high school districts, which are 9 through 12. So you have to be careful when comparing various government agencies, because you may not be comparing apples to apples within that. And so, and a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll get this tip and I'll examine it from that standpoint, but also show a broader picture for the rest of our readers. Like, look, if you think what this school district is doing is questionable, just keep in mind that this is what's going on in your school district too.
What are the tips like? I mean, how are people interacting with you? And I mean, like, you don't have to get into all the crazy ones, but I just kind of, what types of things are people curious about when you're in those money?
We're talking about the suburbs here, so we're talking about schools and how their tax dollars are spent. I mean, the lion's share of school districts are paid for through property taxes, so that's a chief one for us. You move to the suburbs everywhere. Doesn't matter if you're in Illinois or if you're in Oregon or Missouri or Pennsylvania. You move to the suburbs for the schools too. So I mean, people want to keep an eye on what's going on in their schools and make sure that the money that they're sending there, which in Illinois is the lion's share of your property taxes, somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to 80%, are being spent on things that you want them to be spent on, or at least are helping kids, I would think. But so in terms of the tips, I'll get a lot from residents. I also get a lot from the agency hierarchy administrators themselves, who will say, like, hey, if you think what we're doing is questionable, you should check out unit 37 over here.
Don't look here, look over here.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, I'll get on that, but in the meantime, let's chat about what you're up to.
Is it different? And I'm thinking about you and I go way back. We went through journalism school together. But I don't remember that we learned a lot about reporting mostly through data. Was that a different thing for you to learn? Was it harder for you to sink into this role?
Well, so you're talking to a guy, you went to college with me. I was not an all-star mathlete. It took me 3 tries to get through college algebra. And I always joke that, like, what do I need to learn this stuff for? I'm never going to do math. And that's all I do now is math.
But you married an accountant, so it's okay.
Right. Well, this is going to get to my point. By the grace of some luck, I married an accountant who not only knows numbers and is good at them, but also is good at Excel. And when the paper needed somebody to take on data journalism and take on a tax watchdog role, I had some leanings towards Excel and being able to collate this data. Like, I had a modicum of knowledge of how to do that, but then I went full bore into it because I was like, well, this can give me a niche when the newspapers are cutting down on everything these days. Perhaps they won't get rid of the guy that knows how to do this stuff.
That's a smart move.
Yeah. So I barreled into that and learned a lot about Excel and some other programs. I'm doing a lot of data visualization these days too for the paper. We used to have a graphics guy that left for greener pastures as well. But then, of course, we're a newspaper, so we can't go and replace the guy that used to do all our charts and graphics. So that fell on me. And, during COVID, I got to do a lot of that because, you needed it for the COVID reporting.
How are you bridging that between, all of raw numbers and then making the story, making the thing that people in a community can relate to or understand how, I mean, look, especially how it sounds you are with all of these different taxing districts, How do you make it so they can understand and put it into their own terms what's going on with their money?
Well, so the comparing and contrasting really helps when you have 100 towns and you have 100 school districts, when you have 50 townships, and you can see, when you chart that all out, you can see, some place that's doing this and some place that's doing this, and or the rest of them are all up here, and this poor, township down here is doing something, and you can see these comparing and contrasting. A story kind of pops out at you, in terms of like, well, why is it being done this way? I'll give you a great example. Like, let's get back to those township road districts. There are road districts, that they essentially handle all of the maintenance on these roads, usually residential in unincorporated areas of the county. And some of those townships will handle, ballpark 250, 300 lane miles of unincorporated residential roads that they maintain every year, which may or may not sound like a lot, but it is a lot more than some places in the suburbs that only have 20 lane miles, and the road commissioner is getting paid the same amount as the guy it's got 300, lane miles. The budget for it is just as high, and you got to ask questions, and that's where it all comes from, especially when you call the road district, for a week and don't get an answer. So you track him down at home, and he's, on a Tuesday afternoon mowing his lawn, and not at the road commissioner, but still making $80,000 a year. So, so that's generally it, is the comparing and contrasting. The other thing that I found, and I know you didn't really ask that, but I'll read your mind a little bit here, Nick, because I've known you 30 years, is people like the smaller numbers. Like I could tell somebody that this school district is wasting $30 million a year on something, and it goes over their head because they have no concept of $30 million. But if I tell them that this school board went to the city for a special board meeting before a weekend long junket with the school board, they held a special school board meeting where they ordered $10 Cokes from the hotel conference system. that will be the best story that is on the paper for a good 2 days, or on the website for a good 2 days.
All your page views are just going to skyrocket.
People can understand that $10 Coke is insane, but paying $30 million for a gymnasium at a junior high that doesn't have any after school athletics programs, they're just like, I don't see what the problem is there.
So I'm curious here. So as you know, I run a small community suburban paper where I live, and I take I feel like there's a responsibility to when I get calls or tips from readers, like you said, you get a lot, to better explain, I guess, sometimes take to, well, actually you're saying this, but actually the real issues we should be thinking of are this. Do you feel that kind of responsibility to clarify things a little bit, or to get to what the real issues should be?
Yeah. I mean, I'll take everybody's concerns into practice. And the thing is that, a lot of the times many of the tips, they just want somebody to talk to about it because they're confused or don't have the right understanding. Here, a prime example of that, because we have, so many taxing bodies, a lot of the school districts, one of the nice things about it is that the school district audits are all uniform. They're required by the state to have an Excel spreadsheet, essentially, that has multiple tabs, and they all fill out the same thing. Everything that is, tab 2, column B, row 5 for one school district is going to be the same number, the same thing. They're going to be accounting for the same thing in that same, cell in every school district's audit. So you see those things, but they don't make a lot of sense because they don't provide a glossary for every column header. And there's one, a couple of years ago, we had one that one of our opinions page editor got a call that the school district had, millions of dollars, had spent millions of dollars on something that just said artwork or something, and the column header said something like artwork. But I knew that this actually accounted for something else. Like there was a longer, greater explanation, because I'd seen it before and made the same kind of questions to the state board of education, asking, why do all these schools have so much money tied into art? And it wasn't technically art. That was just the header that had existed for so many years, and a number of other things had gotten, pulled into it. So when this caller called, I looked it up, and sure enough, this is what they were, complaining about. And so I had to call them back and explain to them, look, the header says one thing, but it really is a different thing. It's kind of like non-useful capital assets, for lack of a better term. pretty things, maybe, I don't know, but it's a capital asset allocation line that's in there that all school districts have, and it's a holdover from years and years and years ago, apparently, when they had to account for anything that they had purchased, or the foundation, a school district's foundation had given them in value. So A lot of them just a lot of tips wind up just being discussions with me and a taxpayer explaining to them what this number means.
You said you've been doing this, kind of building this role for about 10 years or so.
Yeah, it didn't exist. That's the other thing is like, the Daily Herald, as I explained, we covered hundreds of towns. We covered, or not hundreds, we cover 100 towns. We cover 100 school districts. We had bureaus at the time in 5 of those counties. And a lot of the times we didn't communicate. We had a metro staff that handled like big picture stories, but a lot of the times those were, single issue things that covered, that everybody in our readership area would care about. Nobody before me had ever like decided to take a look at all 100 school districts all at once and all 100 towns all at once, or the 50 townships. And because we didn't have anybody that could pull that data and put it in and take a look at it, comparing and contrasting it.
What's that done, do you think, for your paper and the product that you're putting out to readers?
Well, I think it's given them, something that's unique to the Daily Herald. I think it might be unique to many newspapers across the country. I mean, again, Illinois is such a weird animal when it comes to government that I don't think that this would exist in a Texas. The closest place to it maybe would be Pennsylvania, because they're the next highest number of government bodies. But I'm not aware that Pittsburgh Post-Gazette or the Philadelphia Inquirer does anything like this for their suburban coverage.
How has it been to build that kind of relationship with your audience, with your readers? I mean, if you're relying on that back and forth, on them to call you or email you, and then you're talking back with them to try to explain, was it hard to build that? Because it didn't exist before.
It was at first, because because what we did initially was we came out guns blazing. This was like when the impetus for this column, it used to be weekly, and it was all that I did, and now that we're a little bit shorter staffed and we are in the midst of a pandemic, allegedly still, depending on who you ask, my workload has changed considerably. I mean, I spent the last 2 years doing what I did for taxes and government accountability for COVID, and I'm coming out of that in terms of like being able to track daily COVID figures and see what the state is up to, and the spending on everything that the federal government gave the state and how the state allocated it. So it's changing. But when we started this, it was because we were putting up a paywall on our website, and we wanted to give something to the print subscribers and the online subscribers that they could only see. Like, you either had to get a newspaper or you had to buy a subscription online to the Daily Herald to read these analyses. And we built these up. Like, I had, I think, 5 or 6 investigations in the bank before we launched that, the original column, like in 2011, I'm going to say 2000, well, maybe 2014. No, it was way before that, because 14 was when Piper was born. So anyway, shout out to my 8-year-old daughter, Piper, who's now famous on News Nirvana.
She'll get a shit in the mail later.
That's why I have all this stuff back here. It's not my play toys. It's my 8-year-old's.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it was, and it was a success. It was, really popular. It still is. Like, we get a lot of emails still from longtime readers who are like, why is Jake still covering COVID? Get him back to taxes and government. And I can see their point.
Was there a lot of crossover though, as far as how you were covering COVID in your role and what you do on the tax watchdog thing? I mean, are you? It would seem that there's a lot of crossover, that you're doing a lot of the same process.
There's a ton of data in the COVID stuff. So like, just keeping track of the daily COVID figures. I mean, I have 2 spreadsheets that I have to update daily, or used to update daily, because we were, a lot more concerned about it than we are now. And within those, there were probably 10 tabs on one and 12 tabs on the other. And it involved, various, all the various aspects of the daily COVID update figures. and then there would be, when money would come in from the government, from the federal government to the state.
That's what I was wondering too. Is were you following a lot of those money trails? I mean, that's a lot of money was going different places.
One of the first big ones was the when PPP the PPP loans. PPE is something you need. The PPP is a questionable need. And when those PPPs came out, I think we took some too. There was a lot of concern about where that money was headed, and I thought, one of the most intriguing aspects of that was that religious institutions were getting a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money, and these are these are tax dollars, and these places don't pay taxes. They may pay some income taxes on the staffing and stuff like that, but what they were getting from the government was sure a lot more than covering staffing costs, I thought. So we were one of the first ones to take a look at that, of the how much money that religious institutions throughout the suburbs had received from the federal government for assistance.
The News Nirvana podcast is brought to you by Town News, the creators of Audience Plus. Audience Plus replaces your old school one-size-fits-all paywall with a smarter metering solution that targets visitors with custom offers, converting drive-bys into paying subscribers. You can learn more at townnews.com/audience. As you kind of look forward and you're moving out of pandemic coverage back into your more focused on the tax and stuff, what stories intrigue you? What do you look for? What do you want?
Well, I mean, like how things are going. I mean, generally, it's all like you had this churn of government, and they knew that people were watching, and they kept their nose to the grindstone. And then the pandemic happened, and they still had to keep operating, but news organizations had to shift their focus on other things, and maybe they weren't being as careful and cost conscious. And do
you think we miss stories?
Transparent? Oh, absolutely, we miss stories. I mean, not just waste, government waste type of stories and malfeasance, but we missed good stories, like people doing good. We were so tied up, and we're so limited in our resources anymore. I mean, it is, I always my chief complaint about the last 20 years is that the cost of coffee and a newspaper used to be the same. You could buy each for a quarter, and then somebody came along and decided that $5 was a reasonable amount of money to spend on a cup of coffee. But by God, if you spend $1 on a newspaper, that's outrageous and insane, considering the amount of effort and work that goes into producing a newspaper versus what it goes into producing a glass of coffee.
Okay, this is not fair to ask, but I'm going to do it anyway because you're on the editorial side and not the business side. But how do we fight that? How do we help the audience, the reader, the news consumer understand that the value of it? Is that part of what you're doing, but with your interactions? How do we?
Well, I think they're starting to see that again, like to see the value of it, because you have like these. Everything has become so blurred, and especially over the last 5 or 6 years with the national political scene, where you have all these so-called citizen journalists that are really just puppets of far right and far left outfits, propaganda outfits that are claiming to be journalists, and I think people can see that they're not getting an unbiased view of the world that they had seen in years prior. Now they're getting into echo chamber territory sometimes.
I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and ask you this, and I ask because I just came off covering a local election. We had our local municipal and school elections.
We've got our primaries coming up,
okay,
and it's never fun because of how many taxing bodies we have.
Right. Well, I didn't have that big of a problem, but our local municipal and school elections were April 5th.
Okay.
And you just mentioned the kind of the influx from the national perspective of things because of all of the other quote unquote agencies out there. This was the first time in Jake, it's been 25, 27 years that you and I have been professional reporters.
Yes.
This was the first time I saw that seep into small local elections. I mean, local to me was always kind of the oasis from the state and national rhetoric and crap that comes out. Have you seen it seeping in?
I saw it seeping in a long time. Like, now,
Chicago's a different world. I get that.
It's a different world, but it's all, like even just the suburbs are a different world. I mean, there used to be a time when, the suburbs were really, really red in Chicago, and the city itself was just blue. But now you've got a lot more blue out in the suburbs than you did when I first started here. And there is, like I think back to like the Tea Party politics, of the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when that started up, and people, coming in from various parts of the country to complain about taxes in Illinois. And, it just became really divisive a long time ago. And I don't think people understand that it, like take for granted a lot of what municipal and local government does in their daily lives. And so I think you start seeing more and more people paying attention to that. And that's why you're starting to see more people politically active locally, because these people do play a bigger part in your day-to-day life than Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump.
How do you see kind of our community papers, the suburban papers, the smaller papers, I guess, being that kind of education piece to remind people of what's happening in our backyard? Or is that the paper's responsibility?
Oh, it's definitely the paper's responsibility to keep you informed. That's what you're paying for, is to keep you informed of what's happening in your backyard, and what your money is being spent on, and what the policies that your policymakers are up to. But you got to pay for it. Like it's all there is to it. Like if you want that kind of coverage, you're going to have, you have to invest in it. And I think people think that they don't have to, they just took it for granted. They still take it for granted that they'll get the information one way or the other, but the information that they're getting is, again, coming from very biased sources. If it's not coming from an actual news outlet, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Are you seeing a little bit of success? I mean, just maybe even just from your perspective of being able to accomplish that goal?
It's how do you gauge success? Like,
I guess I just wonder, even anecdotally, just because of your role, you have probably a little more interaction with readership and audience than maybe others do.
I think we all hear from our readers. Nobody's shy in this day and age.
Fair.
And so I definitely hear from our readers. I definitely hear from the communications wings of those that we cover, and by and large, most of it's positive. I'll tease on Twitter sometimes when I get an angry email from somebody who doesn't understand why we would dare report on an uptick in COVID cases when it's only 30% more than last week, but still below the number of the high number of the previous surge. It's nothing to get worried about. I'm like, well, as we've done this before, we've seen, you can kind of see where things are going. So, and before COVID, I would get complaints from, as many accolades as I would get for some of my investigations. I would, I would still get readers that would complain, like, why are you making a big deal about $10 Cokes? And I would have to explain to them that, if somebody that's willing to pay $10 for a can of Coke on your dime, just imagine what they're doing with when you give them $1 million, what they're spending it on.
Right.
So that's, that was kind of my explanation for making a big deal out of, a school district ordering a case of Cokes that cost $10 a piece.
And I don't know if it's appropriate to say as we move out of the COVID pandemic, because who knows if it's really done or not, but what are your plans, I guess, for continuing coverage of it?
For continuing the coverage of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, are you still going to keep running numbers on a regular basis?
So we've moved to just weekly now, like that, and that was done like about a month ago, I want to say. Whenever the national mask mandates started going away, and we'd come down off the Omicron surge, and they started changing, like CDC started changing their metrics of how they were watching everything, and moved to that community level portal. That's when we moved to like a weekly kind of look. Things will pop up during the course of the week where we will, fill in the blanks. If, when the transportation mask mandates got struck down, that was not on a Friday, it was in the middle of the week. So we wrote about that and how that impacted the suburbs. And that was an ever-changing story as well. So, I mean, I think from here on out, I think we're going to look at it more of, from the cost side of things, what the state's paying in resources to keep testing and the vaccine programs going in places where they need them. I think the next big thing is going to be therapeutics and how those are distributed and rationed, if at all, and how that works. How they determine who gets the therapeutics to treat a COVID infection. So there's a lot of things. I mean, this isn't going away in terms of our coverage. It's just getting slowed down because it's not as ever changing as it was.
Right. And I think we're going to see that some of those things, while they happened because of the pandemic, they helped in a lot of other ways. So there was crossover between need and solution. And like one thing that's interesting to me is most school districts, at least here in Missouri, during the pandemic have offered basically free lunch for everybody because of the federal dollars that were coming in. Well, that ends at the end of this school year,
right?
Academic school year. But are they going to see that, that was something that was really a need and should find a way to keep going, or can they?
Yeah.
I mean, is that the kind of thing? I mean,
yeah, I mean, well, I mean, the fascinating thing about that too is, and you and I both have kids in school, public schools. And the fascinating thing about that was that, I don't know how your school district operated this, but like we'd get a menu for the month. And then that suddenly became a menu for the week during the supply chain issue. And then we'd get emails like at least twice a week saying that like a menu item was changing because of supply chain issues and stuff. So, and then I remember like my daughter telling me that, what'd you have for lunch today? And she said Cheerios. And I'm like, Cheerios, like Cheerios and milk.
Well, you're training her to eat like a reporter already.
I know, but I mean, these things that the lunch program, how it's operating currently, I see that, that's one of the great things about public education is that nutritional assistance that it gives, but there's clearly a lot of waste there as well.
Right. Well, I think as we wrap it up, I do want to make sure we get to one topic.
Wrap it up.
And this is a good topic.
Let's just get going.
This is a time for you to brag, because I think everybody needs to hear the story, your Colbert story about how you made TV.
Yes, my crowning achievement as a reporter is having one of my stories in my byline specifically, because all the girls that refused to date me in college now get to see my byline on the Colbert Report. There was a program, this is back when I was covering a city. There's a program in Naperville, Illinois, that a tow truck service offered, and I don't think it's offered anymore, where they'd come and pick you up and anybody that was going to ride in your car and hook up your car and tow you in the cab of the tow truck and tow your car back to your house, unhook it, and drop you off, for a nominal fee. It wasn't out of the kindness of their hearts, but if you needed to get your car home on a Friday night out and still needed to get back to your place in one piece, the tow service would come and pick you up and your car and drop you off. And I obviously found the humor in that as well, which is why I wrote about it. But you can't write about it. It was a straight story, and Colbert and his people found the humor in it as well, and made the story what I wish I could have done. So,
how did you find out that they had picked it up?
The liquor. Oh, how did I find out about the Colbert Report? Because I was watching. Like I'm a journalist. I watched the Colbert Report and Daily Show back when it was must see TV. I was watching that night, and I was like, "Holy cow, that's my story." I was glad it was my story, and not like usually we'd get poached by the Trib or the Sun-Times or something, and they would pull it off of that. But thankfully, this time we got the credit.
Well, I thought it was appropriate that you should get to brag to everybody.
Well, yes,
about your crowning moment.
That is my crowning achievement as a journalist, is to have my work appear on and mocked by Stephen Colbert.
A few episodes ago, we had a student journalist, a college journalist, who covered the State House in Indiana,
mm-hmm.
and so I'm curious. I know your background. You got to do a lot of different things in college and your training, and then now through your professional career. But if you were to meet college journalists or be recruiting college journalists to stay in the field, what are some things that you think are important for journalists, up and coming journalists, to have? What skills and traits?
All of them. Much like you and I had training by fire on all levels of producing a newspaper in college. I think that served us well. It certainly helped us find niches eventually. And it didn't make us, didn't pigeonhole us when it came to finding jobs. I mean, when I started, I don't know if your viewers and listeners know where you went to college, but I will give a Missouri Southern State University a shout out. When I went there on scholarship, part of my job, my reporting duties, was to cover sports once a week at the Joplin Globe. And it turned out, despite my thinking that I would be an awesome sports writer, I was not. I was shocked to learn not going to be the next Grantland Rice. And but the sports editor knew enough not to just give up on me. He knew that I could fill a hole in the paper's features department, and he suggested I go work over there instead of sports, which is the greatest thing that ever happened to me, was going to write and learning how to write features well from the editors and the other writers on that feature staff in Joplin. And from there, I went from failed sports writer to some semi-successful features writer, but part-time employed, to full-time night cops reporter. And so I've done it all in almost every aspect of newspapering. And I would suggest that they do it as well. And it's harder for students today, like college journalism students today, because they got to learn how to take video and edit that and write and shoot pictures, and present the stories and present themselves on social media so that they're a brand. I'm waiting for that shoe to drop, where I'm having to get a TikTok account and do some crazy ass TikTok dance to my spreadsheet.
But I want to see that when it happens.
Yeah.
Do you feel some pressure though with you to maintain a certain thing and to be very consistent with your personal Twitter?
My personal, do I feel consistent? I feel compelled.
I mean, but is there pressure there?
No, not as much as it probably is for some other journalists. And I think that's because, like out of the gate, I made my Twitter account very personal rather than professional. Like I will post my stories and I will post explanations of it, but I also feel like a lot of the people that follow me for my stories are following me because they enjoy the goofy shit that I put on Twitter as well. Can I cuss? I made it 39 minutes, Parker, without saying a naughty word. That's got to be some kind of record.
That might be a record, and we'll allow one.
You can beep it. Yeah, I can take it out of my fee for appearing. My appearance
fee. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to personally connect with the people that you're covering and writing for too. Like I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm going to get as many good tips from people who just see me as like I only care about the money that's being spent in their town and not how they're spending it and what they're up to. And so I will interact with them when they're whatever they're up to. I like to make friends online and joke with them about
coming soon.
Yeah.
The TikTok account.
Yeah, I'm sure that's happening.
Well, Jake, hey, I appreciate you taking a little bit of time today to talk about Watchdog Reporting, data reporting, what you do, and interacting with the audience. I think, the cool thing about the show is I get to talk to people in the industry from all different aspects.
Right.
So we're talking to editorial, business, advertising, all of it. And so I think this is just a good kind of just conversation about working in the suburbs of a metro and not, as you said, not everybody's doing that kind of watchdog, but maybe we all should be doing a little bit more.
Yeah, I definitely think there's more to be done. I mean, we're nowhere near doing as much as we should be doing or we'd like to be doing. But I definitely think that the time is now to do that sort of stuff because they've just been kind of forgotten over the last couple of years of how everything's been going and gotten.
I think that's going to be hard for a lot of us to get back to the other stories, the other coverage, because we've been so hyper focused on, well, like everybody else in every industry, we've been hyper focused on just surviving.
Oh, absolutely.
Getting through the 2 years.
You're not wrong. But that's it. The leaving stones unturned for this long, there is a lot of moss that has grown.
Wow. I missed the odd attempts of Jake Griffin metaphors that make it sound like they're old cliches.
I don't know. I try to sound wise, but I keep on putting my mouth and failing miserably.
Well, Jake, thanks again for the time. I appreciate you coming on and talking, and that'll wrap us up for this episode. We'll talk to everybody next time. The News Nirvana podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or most any of your favorite podcast apps. The News Nirvana podcast is made possible by the generosity of Town News. Connect with Town News at townnews.com. The News Nirvana podcast is produced by Fredcasts. Think, speak, act,